Jen Matthews had always loved the quiet, peaceful life in her small suburban neighborhood. A retired schoolteacher in her late 70s, she lived in a modest home surrounded by friendly neighbors who often waved to her when she took her daily walks. Jean had always been an active woman, but as the years passed, she found comfort in the routine of a slower pace. The mornings were spent tending to her garden, and in the afternoons, she'd stroll through the nearby park with her faithful companion, Rex. Rex was no ordinary dog. He was a retired military working dog, a German shepherd who had spent many years serving in the U.S. Army. Rex had been trained to detect explosives, track suspects, and protect his handlers in dangerous situations. After a long and honorable career, Rex was retired and brought home to Jean, where he could enjoy the peaceful life he had earned. Although Jane had never been a soldier, she quickly learned that Rex had a special way of looking after her. He was more than just a pet. He was her protector, always alert and watching over her. Despite being retired, Rex's instincts were sharp, and his loyalty to Jean was unwavering. They had become a team. Every afternoon, Jean would take Rex for a walk around their quiet neighborhood, where they would enjoy the fresh air and the sights of children playing, neighbors chatting, and the gentle hum of everyday life. On this particular afternoon, the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the peaceful street. Jean and Rex were just finishing their usual walk when they noticed two men up ahead. Jean wasn't overly concerned at first. People passed by all the time, and the men seemed to be minding their own business. They were walking slowly, almost as if they were looking for something. Jean and Rex continued on their path, but as they got closer, the men suddenly stopped in their tracks and turned toward them. The taller man, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, took a few steps forward, blocking Jean's way. The other man, shorter and stockier, stood behind him. Jean felt a slight unease creep up her spine. Rex, sensing her tension, moved closer to her side. His ears perked and his eyes focused on the two men. "Excuse me, Mom," the taller man said, his voice low and gruff. "We need your purse. Hand it over now." Jean's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't afraid of much, but this felt different. She took a small step back, trying to keep a calm face. "I don't have much on me," she replied, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. She wasn't sure if the men were serious or just trying to scare her, but she had learned long ago not to show fear. Rex, however, had already made his move. He stood firm, growling softly, his body tense and ready for action. Jean hadn't seen Rex act like this in a long time. She knew that he could be protective when needed, but she had never imagined she'd be in a situation where his skills would be put to the test. The men, seemingly unimpressed by Rex's stance, took another step toward Jean. They clearly underestimated the dog, thinking of him only as a harmless pet. They didn't know Rex's background. They didn't know that he had been trained to handle dangerous situations far more intense than a simple street encounter. They didn't know that they were about to meet a force far more powerful than they had expected. Jean felt her heart race as the two men stepped closer. The tall man with the hoodie looked directly at her, his expression cold and serious. He wasn't joking. She could see it in his eyes. The stocky man behind him kept glancing around, making sure no one was watching. Jean's mind raced for a moment. Should she try to run? Should she scream for help? But something told her not to move too quickly. She wasn't alone. Rex was by her side, his body taut with focus. "Ma'am, I said hand over your purse." "Now," the tall man repeated, his tone sharper. Jean stayed still, her eyes flicking down to Rex. She could feel the tension in his body. His growl deepened as the men took another step forward, his teeth now slightly visible in a warning. Jean had lived long enough to understand the silent language between her and Rex. She trusted him more than anyone else. She knew he would do anything to protect her. The stocky man took another step toward them. That was all it took. Rex couldn't wait any longer. In an instant, the dog lunged forward with surprising speed, barking loudly, startling the two men. The tall man was so caught off guard that he stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. Rex's growl filled the air, and his muscles were coiled, ready to strike if needed. "Get that dog off me," the tall man shouted, trying to back away from Rex, but the dog was relentless. He moved with the precision of someone who had been trained for such situations. The stocky man hesitated, clearly unsure of how to react to the dog's sudden attack. His eyes darted nervously between Rex and Jen. The situation was no longer just a simple robbery. It had turned into something far more intense, and the men quickly realized they were out of their depth. Rex was standing his ground, his ears flat against his head, and his eyes locked on the two men, warning them to stay back. Jean felt a wave of relief, but it was mixed with a sense of awe. She had always known Rex was capable of protecting her, but seeing it in action was another thing entirely. He wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier, trained for moments like this. The tall man, realizing they weren't going to get what they wanted, glanced nervously at his partner. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, clearly shaken. The stocky man, still trying to figure out what to do, finally nodded. They weren't prepared for Rex's strength, his speed, or his training. Before they could make another move, Rex growled once more, his stance unyielding. The men hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure if they should risk facing Rex again. But seeing the dog's unwavering determination, they finally decided to retreat. The tall man grabbed his partner's arm, pulling him away from Jean and Rex, and they both hurriedly walked down the street, away from the scene. Jean stood frozen, her heart still pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened. One moment, she had been on her usual afternoon walk, and the next, she had faced down a potential robbery, with Rex defending her like the hero he was. She looked down at her loyal companion, who was now sitting calmly by her side, his eyes scanning the area to make sure the danger had passed. "You did it, Rex," Jean whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "You saved me." Rex tilted his head slightly, as if understanding, then gave a soft, approving bark. Though the situation was over, Jean couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for Rex. He had done what he was trained to do, without hesitation, without fear. He had protected her. And now, Jean realized, she owed him more than just the love and care she had always given him. Rex wasn't just a retired military dog. He was her true hero. The two men, who had initially seemed so confident, now appeared completely shaken. As they hurried away, their steps quick and unsteady, Jean stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. She was still clutching her purse, which, in the chaos, she hadn't even thought to hand over. Her heart raced, and a flood of emotions swept over her: relief, confusion, and awe at what Rex had just done. Rex, however, had already moved on. His alert eyes were scanning the street, his ears flicking at every sound, as if he was making sure the danger was truly gone. The way he moved, so focused and determined, reminded Jane that Rex was not just her companion. He was a highly trained dog with skills that far exceeded anything she had ever imagined. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and admiration for him. "You're something else, aren't you?" Jean said softly, smiling down at him. Rex looked up at her, his body still tense, though his growl had quieted. His eyes, however, remained sharp, ever watchful. Jean reached down to pet him, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. It wasn't long before the sound of sirens filled the air, and within minutes, a police car pulled up at the end of the street. Jean hadn't called the authorities herself. She had been too stunned to think clearly, but someone had seen what happened and made the call. The officers quickly jumped out of the car, their hands already on their holsters as they surveyed the scene. Jean took a deep breath and walked toward them, Rex right by her side. The officers noticed Rex immediately, his military vest still hanging loosely around his neck, a clear sign of his past life. One of the officers, a tall man with a friendly face, approached her. "Are you all right, Mom?" he asked, his voice calm yet concerned. Jean nodded, though she could still feel the tremor in her hands. "I'm fine. But those two men tried to rob me. They didn't expect my dog to. Well, stop them." The officer's eyebrows raised in surprise, and his gaze shifted to Rex, who was now sitting patiently by Jen's side, his eyes watching the officers carefully. The dog's calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos of just moments before. "I've never seen a dog act like that in person," the officer said, clearly impressed. "Is this your dog?" "Yes," Jean replied, her voice soft but proud. "His name is Rex. He's a retired military dog." The officer's face lit up with recognition. A retired Army canine. "Well, that explains a lot," he said, chuckling. "We're going to need to take a statement from you, ma'am. Do you mind if we ask you a few questions?" Jean nodded, and the officer gestured to his partner, who began taking notes. She felt a mix of emotions, still shaken, but also incredibly grateful for Rex's protection. As they talked, the officers learned more about Rex's impressive background, how he had been trained for various tasks, including detecting explosives, tracking suspects, and even defending his handlers. It became clear that Rex was far more than just a pet. He was a highly skilled member of the military, and it was evident that his training had kicked in at the right moment. Jean's story quickly spread, and before long, people from around the neighborhood began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some of her neighbors, who had known her for years, were amazed to hear about what had happened. They had always seen Rex as just a friendly dog who enjoyed his walks, but now they understood that he was much more than that. As Jane answered questions from the officers, she couldn't help but think back to the moment when Rex had stood between her and the two men. The way he had protected her so effortlessly, without hesitation. It filled her with a profound sense of gratitude and admiration for Rex's unwavering loyalty. She knew then that, no matter what came next, she would always feel safe with Rex by her side. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that Rex wasn't just her dog. He was her protector, her hero. As the officers continued their investigation, Jean stood with Rex by her side, feeling a strange mix of calm and disbelief. She had always known that Rex was a special dog, but seeing him spring into action like that had left her in awe. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how extraordinary his training had been. Rex had been through intense situations during his time in the military, situations far beyond anything Jin could have imagined. But today, he had proven just how powerful the training was, even in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The officers took a few more notes and spoke with a few neighbors who had witnessed the incident from their windows. Most of the people who had seen the commotion were amazed by how quickly Rex had acted. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, even mentioned that she had seen Rex and Jane walking together every day for years, but had never imagined that Rex had been trained for something so dangerous. "He's always been such a friendly dog," Mrs. Thompson said, shaking her head in amazement. "I never would have guessed he had that kind of power." Jean smiled softly as she listened. She had always known Rex was more than just a friendly companion. She had seen glimpses of his training before, when he'd respond quickly to her commands or protect her from other dogs that had gotten too close. But today was different. Today, Rex had faced a real threat, and he had handled it with the skill and focus of a true professional. After a while, the officers finished their questioning and told Jun that they would be able to track down the two men who had tried to rob her. They had already gotten a good description from the witnesses and were confident they would find the suspects quickly. "We'll keep you updated," the officer said, "and we'll make sure those two are held accountable for what happened here today. But I have to say, your dog definitely deserves some credit. He's the real hero in this story." Jean felt a swell of pride, and she reached down to pet Rex, who was still sitting calmly by her side. Rex seemed to sense her feelings, his tail wagging ever so slightly. Despite the tense moments they had just gone through, he had remained steady and strong. Jean couldn't help but feel grateful for him. He had not only protected her, but had also given her a sense of security that she had never fully realized before. As the officers left to continue their investigation, Jean slowly made her way back home with Rex. She walked more slowly than usual, her mind still processing the events of the day. The walk that had started out as a peaceful afternoon stroll had turned into something far more intense. But through it all, Rex had been there, steady and loyal. When they arrived home, Jean sat down on her porch and gave Rex a treat. He looked up at her with his intelligent eyes, as if to say, "I did my job. Now it's time to relax." Jean smiled and scratched behind his ears, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As she sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, Jean realized that she no longer felt the same sense of vulnerability she had felt earlier that day. With Rex by her side, she knew she was never truly alone. No matter what life threw her way, she had the comfort of knowing that Rex would always be there to protect her. And as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Jean felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Rex had reminded her that sometimes, even in the most ordinary moments, extraordinary things could happen. And in that moment, Jean knew that her life, and the life of her brave dog, had just become a little bit more extraordinary. The next few days passed in a blur for Jean. The news of the attempted robbery and Rex's heroic actions spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who had known Jean for years were amazed at the story, and many of her neighbors began to stop by to check on her, offering words of support and admiration. It was clear that Jean and Rex had become the talk of the town. Despite the attention, Jean felt a deep sense of calm. She was grateful for the care and concern of her neighbors, but more than anything, she was thankful for Rex. Every time she looked at him, she was reminded of just how much he meant to her. His presence brought a sense of safety and peace that she hadn't fully understood before. One afternoon, as Jean sat on her porch, sipping her tea, a car pulled up in front of her house. She looked up, curious, as two officers stepped out. They were the same officers who had arrived the day of the incident. The taller officer, who had spoken with her that day, smiled warmly at her as he approached. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Matthews," he said politely. "How are you doing?" Jean smiled back. "I'm doing well, thank you. I've been keeping busy, and Rex and I are getting back to our usual routine." "That's great to hear," the officer said, glancing down at Rex, who was sitting calmly by Jean's feet. "We just wanted to stop by and let you know that we were able to track down the men who tried to rob you. They're both in custody now." Jean's heart skipped a beat, but she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been wondering what would happen to the men who had threatened her and Rex. Knowing they were in custody made her feel safer, but also gave her a sense of justice. The officers continued to explain that the two men had a history of petty crimes, but they had never been involved in anything quite as serious as what they had attempted that day. "We're just glad you and Rex are safe," the officer said. "We're also really impressed by Rex's actions." He didn't hesitate for a second. Jean smiled, looking down at her loyal dog. "He's always been a protector, but I didn't expect him to do something like that. It's just amazing how quickly he responded." The officer nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Well, we wanted to make sure you know that Rex's bravery didn't go unnoticed. In fact, we've spoken with the local animal shelter, and they want to honor Rex for his service. They're planning a small ceremony to thank him for his heroic actions." Jean's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected such recognition, but the idea of Rex being honored for his bravery filled her with pride. "A ceremony?" she repeated, still trying to process the idea. "Exactly," the officer replied. "It'll be a small event, just a few people from the community, but we think it's the least we can do to show our appreciation for what he did." Jean felt a deep sense of pride swelling in her chest. She had always known Rex was special, but now, it seemed as though the whole town was beginning to recognize it too. The idea that her loyal companion would be honored for his bravery filled her with gratitude. Rex had been a hero in the truest sense of the word, and it felt good to know that people were taking notice. "Thank you," Jean said, her voice full of emotion. "That means so much to me, and I know it will mean a lot to Rex too." The officer smiled and nodded. "You're welcome, Mrs. Matthews, and we'll keep you updated on the ceremony details. We just wanted to let you know that Rex is a local hero now, and we couldn't be more proud of him." As the officers left, Jane sat back in her chair, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and pride. She looked at Rex, who was still sitting beside her, his head tilted slightly as if he knew something important was happening. Jean couldn't help but smile. She had always known Rex was more than just a dog. He was her protector, her friend, and now he was a hero. And as she sat there, basking in the warmth of the sun, Jean realized that she would never take Rex's loyalty and bravery for granted again. He had changed her life in ways she never expected, and she was incredibly grateful for the bond they shared. The day of the ceremony arrived sooner than Jean had expected. The entire neighborhood seemed to be buzzing with excitement. Everyone was talking about Rex and the heroism he had shown just a few days earlier. Jean had never thought her quiet little life would attract so much attention, but now it seemed like the whole town wanted to honor Rex. She was both surprised and deeply moved by the outpouring of support. As Jen and Rex made their way to the local animal shelter for the ceremony, Jean felt a warm sense of pride in her heart. It wasn't just the recognition that mattered. It was the fact that Rex had made such a big impact on the people around her. He had shown everyone what true loyalty and bravery looked like, and she couldn't be more proud of him. The shelter was decorated with balloons and banners, and a small crowd had gathered in the front yard. There were neighbors, local animal lovers, and even a few news reporters. Jean had no idea there would be so many people, but she was glad to see how many people were there to honor Rex. They had all heard the story and wanted to show their appreciation. As Jean approached the gathering with Rex by her side, a woman in a red vest walked up to greet them. She introduced herself as the shelter's manager and explained that the ceremony would begin shortly. "We're so happy to have you both here today," she said warmly. "Rex is a true hero, and we're so grateful to be able to honor him." Jean smiled and thanked the woman. She could see Rex standing tall beside her, his tail wagging slightly as if he understood the special occasion. Even though Rex had been trained for serious situations, there was something calming about seeing him so relaxed in the midst of all the attention. It was clear that, in Jen's presence, he felt safe and comfortable. Soon, the ceremony began, and everyone gathered around in a circle. The shelter manager took the microphone and started by telling everyone about Rex's background and his service in the military. She spoke about his training, the dangerous missions he had been a part of, and the impressive skills that had made him such a valuable member of the Army. Jean listened, feeling both proud and amazed as the woman spoke. Rex had always been more than just a dog to her, but hearing his accomplishments shared with the crowd made her realize just how extraordinary his life had been. After the speech, the shelter manager handed Jean a framed certificate, which read, "In honor of Rex, a true hero, protector, and friend." It was a beautiful certificate, but it wasn't the paper that mattered. It was the recognition of Rex's incredible service and dedication. Jean's eyes filled with tears as she took the certificate in her hands, and she looked down at Rex, who stood beside her, calm and proud. The crowd cheered, and many of the people took photos, capturing the moment for their own memories. Some of the neighbors who had witnessed the incident took the opportunity to thank Rex personally, telling him how much they appreciated his bravery. Jean couldn't help but smile as she watched Rex interact with the people around him. Despite his past, despite the dangerous work he had done, he was still the same dog who enjoyed lounging in the sun and playing with Jean in the yard. As the ceremony came to a close, Jean felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just the certificate or the applause that mattered to her. It was knowing that Rex had made such a difference. In that moment, Jean realized that sometimes the quiet moments of life can hold the most meaning. Rex had never asked for recognition, but today He was receiving it in a way that felt right. Jean leaned down and whispered to Rex, "You're the best dog anyone could ask for. I'm so proud of you." Rex looked up at her with his intelligent eyes, as if he understood every word, and gave a soft bark of approval. Jean's heart swelled with love for her companion, the dog who had protected her and become a true hero in her life. As the crowd slowly dispersed and the last few pictures were taken, Jean stood quietly with Rex, soaking in the quiet happiness of the day. They had faced something difficult together, and today they were celebrating not just Rex's heroism, but the strong bond they had formed over the years. After the ceremony, life slowly returned to normal for Jean and Rex. The buzz around the neighborhood gradually faded, and the attention shifted elsewhere. But Jean felt a deep sense of fulfillment that lingered. She knew that things would never be the same. Rex had become more than just her dog. He was a symbol of bravery, loyalty, and the unexpected strength that could emerge in times of need. Even though the excitement of the ceremony had passed, Jean couldn't shake the feeling of pride every time she looked at Rex. People still came by from time to say hello and express their gratitude for what he had done, and she never grew tired of telling the story. It wasn't just about the robbery or Rex's swift actions. It was about the bond they shared and the way they had faced danger together. One afternoon, Jean was sitting in her living room when there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find one of the officers who had been at the scene that day. The officer smiled at her, holding a small envelope in his hand. "Hello, Mrs. Matthews. I just wanted to stop by and check in on you," he said, his voice friendly. "And I also have something for Rex." Jean raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "For Rex? What is it?" The officer handed her the envelope, and Jean could feel a sense of excitement building. She opened it carefully and found a letter from the mayor of the town, along with a small medal. The letter read, "Dear Rex, in recognition of your extraordinary bravery and your outstanding service as a protector and hero, the town of Willowbrook is honored to present you with this Medal of Courage. Your actions on insert date saved a life, and your loyalty and bravery have inspired us all. Thank you for being a true hero." Jean's heart swelled with emotion as she read the letter aloud. The medal, which had a small engraving of a dog's paw, sparkled under the light. It was clear that the town wanted to express their gratitude in a way that was both meaningful and heartfelt. Jean smiled and gently placed the medal around Rex's neck, where it rested comfortably against his fur. "That's for you, buddy," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Rex looked up at her, his tail wagging gently, as if he understood the significance of the moment. The officer, who had been watching the exchange, nodded approvingly. "Rex truly deserves it. I just wanted to bring it over myself, as I know how much he means to you." Jean smiled and thanked the officer. She was touched by the gesture, and it made her realize just how much Rex had impacted not just her life, but the lives of everyone around them. The officer lingered for a moment longer, chatting about the case and telling Jen that the two men who had tried to rob her were now facing serious charges. They would not be able to harm anyone again, and Jen would no longer have to worry about them. After the officer left, Jane sat down with Rex and looked at the medal again. It wasn't just a shiny piece of metal, it was a reminder of how far they had come. From the quiet mornings when they walked through the neighborhood to the day that Rex had stepped in to protect her, it felt like they had been through so much together. She knew that Rex had always been special, but now, everyone else did too. That evening, as Jane sat on the porch with Rex by her side, she thought about the future. She thought about all the moments they still had ahead of them, the simple walks in the park, the lazy afternoons spent together, and even the quiet evenings when they sat in the living room. Rex had always been her companion, but now he was more than that. He was her protector, her hero, and a reminder that sometimes ordinary moments could become extraordinary with the right person or dog by your side. Jean smiled as she scratched behind Rex's ears, the evening sky turning a deep orange as the sun set. They had faced something scary together, but now They could simply enjoy the peace they had earned. She knew that, no matter what came next, she and Rex would always face it together. As the weeks went by, life for Jean and Rex returned to a peaceful routine. The excitement of the robbery and the ceremony had settled, but the bond between Jean and her loyal dog only grew stronger. Every day, as they walked through their neighborhood, Jean couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. She had always known that Rex was special, but now she had seen firsthand how extraordinary he truly was. Rex continued to be her faithful companion, always by her side, whether they were taking a quiet walk or simply relaxing at home. He had a way of making every moment feel safe and comforting. Jean often found herself reflecting on the events of that day, the day when Rex had acted so quickly to protect her. She realized how lucky she was to have him in her life, not just as a pet, but as a protector and a true friend. As the seasons changed and the days grew longer, Jane and Rex enjoyed many simple pleasures. They spent their mornings at the local park, where Rex would chase after sticks and run with the other dogs. He was always happy, his tail wagging with excitement as he played. But Jane could see that he never strayed too far from her. It was as if he knew she was his responsibility, and he would always make sure she was safe. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Jane thought about all that had happened. She was still amazed by the way Rex had protected her, but more than that, she realized how much he had changed her life. Before Rex, she had often felt a sense of quiet loneliness, even surrounded by people. But with him by her side, she had found a sense of peace and security that she hadn't known she was missing. It was then that Jean made a decision. She had always loved animals, and she had seen how much joy and comfort Rex brought into her life. So she decided to volunteer at the local animal shelter, hoping to give back in some way for all the love and protection Rex had given her. She wanted to help other dogs, like Rex, find their forever homes and experience the kind of bond she shared with him. Jean began visiting the shelter once a week, helping to care for the dogs and assist with adoption events. It didn't take long for her to realize how fulfilling it was to be around the animals. Every dog she met had its own unique personality, and Jean felt a deep connection to each one. She knew what it was like to have a loyal companion, and she wanted to help others experience the same joy. As she continued volunteering, Jane began to form new friendships with people in the community who shared her love for animals. She met other dog owners, rescue workers, and volunteers who all had a passion for giving back and helping animals in need. It felt good to be part of something bigger, to know that she was making a difference in the lives of both the animals and the people who adopted them. At the same time, Rex continued to be her unwavering companion. He was always there when she needed him, whether it was for a walk, a cuddle, or just some quiet time together. The bond between them had only deepened with time, and Jane knew she would always be grateful for the day Rex had stepped in to protect her. Years passed, and Jane's life with Rex was filled with more memories, more walks, more quiet moments, and more adventures. Rex had truly become a part of her family, and she couldn't imagine life without him. He had brought so much love and courage into her world, and she knew that their story would always be one she cherished. One day, as Jan and Rex sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Jean realized just how much her life had changed. She had gone from feeling lonely and uncertain to feeling completely fulfilled, all thanks to the loyal dog sitting beside her. And as Rex laid his head in her lap, Jean whispered softly, "You're my hero, Rex. I'm so lucky to have you." And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above them, Jean knew that their bond would never fade. It would remain as strong as ever, an unbreakable connection between a woman and the dog who had protected her, loved her, and changed her life forever.